All right, let's flip it on. You know, the whole point of this video is that whatever gear you have, single coil, some practice amp, you can get a tone that is satisfying for playing AC/DC. And what I've got 3 guitars. I've got this single coil Strat, I've got a Telecaster, I got a humbucker, I got 3 different amps, I got a tube amp, I got a solid state, and I got a PA monitor system, and I'm gonna show you how to get AC/DC tone out of those, all of those. You know, the beauty of AC/DC was they didn't have complex signal chains. You know, they didn't have pedals. They just plugged their guitars into their amps, cranked them, and played. I mean, granted, they had fantastic amps. I mean, Marshall JTM 45s and Marshall Super Leads are awesome amps. They're legendary. But you know, Angus famously said at one point that he's in a rock and roll guitar band. He doesn't want to be up on stage tapping his feet, and we can all benefit from that. So I'm going to share with you some tips about playing, some tips about setting up your setups, particularly for single coils. And we're also going to do a little bit of a deep dive into, or not a deep dive, but we're going to talk about the setup that they used for Back in Black, because I think it's interesting. So stick around. We're going to cover all that stuff, and I promise you I will butcher some more AC/DC. I mean, why not? So the first thing I want to talk about is the signal chain, okay? Now, you may think the signal chain is guitar, foot pedals, amp, okay? That's not the signal chain. The signal chain starts right here. It starts here in fingers. You know, it starts in your fingers. Actually, it starts in your head, but it starts in your fingers, okay? And what I mean by that is if you want to sound like AC/DC, you gotta play like Angus Young. You got to mimic the way he plays. You've got to have the same pick attack as him. You've got to have the same strum. You've got to bend the chords the same way, you know, and you've got to have the same timing as him. Part of that is just listening to the recorded tracks and playing along with them and getting it all kind of down. And part of that is thinking about it with any artist. You know, I mean, it's an often rock cliche that tone is in the fingers, and people will say that, oh, you know, Eddie Van Halen on any guitar sounds like Eddie Van Halen, and it's probably true, because what matters isn't the tone that Eddie has. What matters is that it's all how he plays. So I have a couple ideas I want to share with you about how to play like Angus Young, but I'm going to defer those for now, because I want to move on to the next phase of the signal chain, which is still not the guitar. It's this thing. It's the pick. That is what connects your fingers to the guitar and gives you all the feedback from the strings and everything. And here, again, it's interesting. I never hear people talk about what picks artists use, but it makes a difference. You know, the pick you use affects the tone, and it also affects the way that you play. Now, we do know what Angus uses. He uses Fender 351 celluloid heavy guitar picks. That's what he uses, and he uses ones that are hot stamped, so they have a little texture that he can grip. And so if you want to sound like Angus, use that pick. Use those heavy Fender celluloid picks. The important part about the pick in this case, celluloid is a little bit soft. It wears out pretty quick, and I prefer something like, I prefer sort of this material. This is DiMarzio Cortex, but it's like an Ultrex. It's just it's a little bit slippier plastic, and it's a little bit more durable. But what's important is that whatever pick you're using to play AC/DC, that it's a heavy pick, because you won't get the same purchase on the strings, and you will get a different tone out of the wound strings. If you use something like this, this is a 0.4 millimeter pick, so I've gone from 1 millimeter with these down to like 0.4 millimeter. And what will happen with this little 0.4 millimeter one is that when I strum a chord like this G chord, it'll have trouble hitting these wound strings hard. And so the low end is a little bit mushy. And if I come at it with, you know, this celluloid pick, hopefully that's coming through. It's a little bit muddier on this. And also, when you play other sections, you know, when you're really picking, this thing is going to fold on you. So the most important thing is to have the heavy pick. And then the celluloid pick is a little warmer. If you play something like this Cortex pick, it's a little brighter. So it'll color the tone a little bit one way or the other. But the pick is important, you know. Use the right pick. The other thing about the pick, just while I'm on it, is that the pick, there's a feedback loop between you and the pick. So however it's reacting to the strings is how you're going to adjust the way you're playing. And so if you're using a light pick or a medium pick, you will kind of compensate your playing immediately to adjust for that. You might choke down on the pick a little. You might just hold it a little different. You might, and so you know, players can get good tone out of light and medium picks. It's just they've switched their playing around to do that. But we know what Angus uses, so might as well just use that pick. All right, so that's picks. Now now I want to go back to play style. Now, one thing that Angus does, I think, I can't see, I mean, the guy runs around on stage so much, I can't tell how he's playing. I mean, actually, honestly, it doesn't even look like he's playing the guitar. It looks like he's in a movie or something and he's pretending he's playing the guitar, because his hands just, I don't know how you play the guitar and bob your head and like duck walk or whatever. I don't know how you do that and still play the guitar as well as he does. That in itself is amazing, really. But I do think that he's doing this. I think that when he strums a chord, I think he's snapping his wrist. I don't think he's strumming a chord by, you know, hinging at the elbow and, you know, I mean, I think he's snapping his wrist more to drive these chords through. So he's, and the other reason why I think they're doing that is because a lot of their stuff has got palm muting in it, and if you have to palm mute, you know, you want to you want your wrist real close if you're going to palm mute immediately like that. So that is my one play tip for you with Angus Young in the tone, which is, you know, to snap your wrist so that you can get it's like, right? I mean, that's all snapping, and if you snap, you're going to get that sort of DC, you know, ripping sound to their chords. Okay, so that's enough about playing and picks. So now let's move on to the next thing in this signal chain, which is the strings. Okay, and again, we know what Angus uses. Angus uses Ernie Ball 9s. That's what he uses. I think he just uses the steel ones. They're in the pink package. I don't think he uses the like solid nickel ones, or not solid nickel, but the nickel ones. There's the classic rock nickel ones, and then there's just the regular Ernie Balls. I think he just uses regular Ernie Ball 9s. So what do the strings do? I mean, they do affect tone. Again, they affect tone, but they also kind of affect the way you're playing. 9s are pretty easy to bend. And then on top of that, he's got an SG, which has a shorter scale length. So he's got pretty slinky strings on there, but it suits AC/DC. There's a lot of string bending, And they also, most of their songs are in standard tuning. So it makes sense that he's running 9. So if you want to play with the strings that Angus plays with, use 9s. It will probably help achieve that tone, you know. And by tone, I don't just mean the way the strings sound. I mean the way he's playing. Okay, so that's the strings. So now we're going to move on to the next thing in the line, which I guess is the guitar. And, you know, he's using an SG, which is a humbucker bass guitar. He's probably playing it in the bridge. I'm sure he's playing it in the bridge. And so at this point, we're going to get into setting up amps. And we're going to start with this Marshall. And I'm actually going to start with, a different guitar. I'm going to start with a humbucker guitar, because a humbucker is closer to what Angus used. All right, this is a Music Man Albert Lee guitar, humbucker in the bridge, hardtail like an SG. I've got 9s on this. I've got it on the bridge pickup, tone at 10. We're going to want volume at around 8 for this. And just to give you a taste of what it sounds like clean. Okay. You know, humbucker, or I mean bridge humbucker. It's pretty normal. All right, so now let's talk about the amp. This is in the right ballpark. This is a Marshall amp, so we got the right name on it. This is also a tube amp. This is a DSL-5. It's got a tube preamp and a tube power amp stage. So Angus, when they did Back in Black, supposedly they used super leads on that album, even though they were touring with JTM 45s. And so his tone signal path was just guitar to the amp. However, supposedly he has this wireless transmitter, this Schaefer box that was a wireless transmitter on his SG, and that had an onboard compressor, and that was contributing to his tone as well. There's a lot of people who get into that. But for all intents and purposes, this is a scaled down version of what he had. It's the right amp brand. It's, you know, it's their tone. So we're on the ultra gain channel is what it calls it on here. And first thing you do to get the tone is you turn all the reverb off. You want no reverb. This has some tone coloring buttons. We want these off. All of the tone controls are at 10. They're all dimed. The reason for that is this is most amps have passive EQ, and so when these are turned down, they're actually taking tone away, and we don't want to take any tone away. We want everything to go through the amp. So dime your EQ, and then I've got the volumes down right now. Now this has gain and volume, and the way that this sort of works, as far as I can tell on this amp, is gain is like the preamp gain, and volume is like the master volume. Now those amps that Angus and Malcolm were using, you know, 50 or 100 watt heads, they have massive amounts of headroom in those amps. And so I think they were overdriving their preamp and then, you know, having that overdriven signal and then just running it through the power amp. And so it's an overdriven signal with going into an amp with a ton of headroom. And the way you simulate that on these amps is you turn the volume up real high. That gives you sort of your headroom, and then you just add a little bit of gain. You don't add a lot of gain. Oh, I should also mention that I have, even though this is a 5 watt amp, I have I'm in low power mode, so I believe it's a half watt. There's a switch on the back to put it on low power mode, and it takes some of the punch out of the amp, and it does diminish the tone, but it allows me to go deeper into these dials and demonstrate things. So we've got the volume about midway, and I've just got a little bit of gain. I'm just going to show you what that sounds like. If I turn up my guitar. So again, I have my guitar probably at about 8, and I need a little bit more. So I'm getting some drive out of it right now, but I need to bring up my gain a little more. You can hear it starting to growl. Now it's getting close. Now, one thing I want to mention about this is that so this sort of simulates gain out of the preamp with some headroom. If I bring this, so this is fairly clean sounding. Let me just play that again. If I bring the gain up and I bring the volume down so that these are closer to each other, you get more of a compressed or saturated sound. Okay, that's like an amp that's got no headroom left, and we don't want that. So something more like that. Now, once you start like getting into it, getting close, there's a couple of riffs I use to sort of dial it in. One is, both are from You Shook Me All Night Long. One is the opening where it's just like. And I'm not getting quite enough gain off that, so. The other one is the chorus. And what I'm listening here for is I'm trying to hear if I'm getting good note separation. And that's not bad. Might be a little bit too much drive. That sounds a little better. All right. Let's get a little bit more volume. And I think that's pretty darn close. I haven't really had to do much to do this, right? Like I've just done, you know, it's not like it's complicated. There is one thing I will say. I want to do something here. So that G note is ringing, or that G chord is ringing out real nice. You can hear it sizzling. If your guitar is out of tune, even a little bit, if your G string is a little bit out of tune, and I'm going to sharpen this just a little bit. I mean, just a little bit. In fact, I'm going to just sharpen it the slightest amount. Maybe you can see this. Let's see. Okay. You see how much I've got it sharpened? Barely any. Okay. Listen to what this does to the tone. You hear how bad that sounds now? It's super muddy. You know, other things sound fine, but that G chord is gone. So I'm just going to unsharpen it a little. You can just hear as I unsharpen it how. And I need to go a little more. That might have been too much. Let's just check. Just about spot on. And so you can literally hear if that G chord doesn't ring out pure, it doesn't mean that your amp is off. It can mean you're just out of tune. All right, so we're pretty much in the pocket. Got G chords ringing out. If you can hear the notes when you play like the opening. Just check. Everything looks good. You're pretty much good to go. All right. So now let's switch guitars to a single coil. Actually, I'm going to turn this down. All right, so now I'm going to go to this Telecaster. And same thing we got in the bridge. I should probably just do the... You can hear how much brighter that is. Turn the volume down. Probably turn it up a little. All right, so what do you got to do for a Telecaster? All right, I've already dialed the amp and it's pretty much where it needs to be. But it sounds real thin, right? It just sounds thin. So what do you do with a Telecaster to fix that? Well, this Telecaster doesn't have a tone knob on it. This is a pickup blend. So I can go to my neck pickup, which sounds like this. So here's my bridge. Here's my neck. And when I'm on the bridge, I can blend a little neck pickup in there. And that just softens it up. So when I go to my, so when I go to this dirty channel on the Marshall, you hear how much better that sounds. If I take out the neck pickup and with the neck pickup in, so one way to solve it is to blend in a little neck pickup. If you have a guitar that has this, there's a fair number of guitars that are wired with blends. I can think of another Music Man guitar, the Hunter Hayes Cutlass is a 3 single coil guitar that has a pickup blend knob on it instead of tone. If you don't have that, then the next thing to do is to add a little reverb. So here it is without any blend. And so if you add a little reverb, what that does is it just sort of fattens the signal a little bit. It just gives it that sound like there's a humbucker. It's not perfect, but it's a trick. And the thing about a Telecaster is it's a single coil, but it's a big single coil that has a lot of whines in it. So it's already a fat sounding pickup. So it's not that far off of a humbucker in terms of its tone to begin with. And then when you add a little reverb, it just takes it very close to the humbucker. So that's a Telecaster. Either blend the neck in a little if you can do that, or give it a little reverb. So now let's move on to a Strat. All right, so this is a Strat. I'm in the bridge pickup again. Now you can hear how much brighter we've gotten. smaller single coil than the Telecaster, doesn't have the same fatness to it. Even though this pickup is a fat 50s pickup, it's still quite thin. Okay, so when we switch this over to the dirty channel, it sounds thin. So what do we, oh, actually I do have the reverb on. Let me take the reverb off. It's even worse with the reverb off. It's quite thin. So it's quite thin. All right, so for the Strat, what you're going to do is you want a little bit of reverb, just like the Tele. That's going to fatten up a little, but it doesn't fatten up that much. Now, this amp has this deep tone button, and it does what you would think it would do. It adds some depth to the tone. And so when I turn this on, so if I have this off, and when I turn it on, it just gives it a little more breadth. So the one thing you notice, I haven't really messed with the gain or volume. You can actually dial these in and get a little bit better, but you know, the process is going to be the same for every guitar. So if you have a single coil, you will dial these in specifically for you. But for the Strat, you want a little reverb, and if you have a deep tone or something like that, you want that. You may be tempted to play in the 4, I think this is the 4 position, or the 2 position, I can't remember. But you may be tempted to play these 2 pickups together. Don't do that. It really colors the tone, like when you, or it brings out too much of the Strat tone. If you play something like, so this part, that bent G, it just sounds too Strat-like, you know, so you, that just sounds too Strat-like if you've got it in the bridge. It's just going to come through better. So in the bridge, deep if you've got it. If you don't have deep, you can take a little off with the tone of the guitar, but you will lose, if you do that, you will lose some of this, you know, you'll lose some bite in these kind of high E string kind of single note plucks. So, you know, it's up to you if you want to roll a little tone off to give it a little more fatter sound. You know, Back in Black, it needs a little bit fatter tone than the other songs on it. It's got a little bit fatter tone, but anyway. All right, so those are the 3 guitars on the Marshall. So now we'll move on to a solid state amp. All right, so now I've switched the Marshall out for an orange. That's an Orange Crush 35 RT back there. That's 35 watts of solid state power. Same controls as the Marshall. We've got reverb, 3-band EQ, clean and dirty channel. We got dirty volume, dirty gain, and we've got clean gain. So same controls, but this thing works in a different fashion than the Marshall. Let's start by putting it on the clean tone. Volume at 10 for this amp on your guitar. Don't take any off. I'll talk about that. So it's actually got a really nice clean tone, but the amp works differently. So whereas on the Marshall, I set the volume and then brought the gain up. So I set the volume for how loud I wanted the amp to be, and then I sort of brought the gain up until I had the crunch I wanted. This amp works the exact opposite way. You set the gain to where you want it to be, where you want the crunch to be, and then you bring the volume up so you have a volume at the level. So the best way to illustrate this is, let me just put it on the dirty channel, and I'm going to put some... Oh, and the other thing is I've got the reverb shut off. I've got the tones all dying, just like in the Marshall. So so you can hear that's got a very little bit of crunch to it. Now what's going to happen is, watch when I turn up the volume on this. Okay. No matter what volume I set it at, it tries to maintain the same crunch setting, which is actually nice. So however I adjust the volume, it's holding the crunch at that level. But here's the problem, why it works different, is I'm going to turn the volume down, and I'm going to turn the gain down, okay? Now at this point, I can't even hear the amp over the strings, okay? I'm just hearing the strings. Now watch what happens when I turn the gain up. Now it gets crunchy, or it gets, you know, it growls, but the volume doesn't put a ceiling on how loud the amp gets. It just keeps getting louder. The more gain I give it, the louder and louder it gets. It's like it doesn't work in the same way that the Marshall. It doesn't work like it has a master volume where you can set a volume and sort of that holds the power amp to that level, or that's my understanding of how master volumes work. So because it's working this way, we attack the tone by going with the gain first. So I'm going to set the volume at a reasonable level and then start bringing up the gain until I get some crunch. Jeez. That was not as reasonable as I thought it was. I mean, that sounds nice. Now, the other thing to mention is I have this at 10. This amp just works better if you send the full signal from the guitar. If I back this up, if I back off the volume here, I lose some of the gain, but when I bring it back on, it's more saturated. So by giving this as much output from my guitar as possible, it gives it a cleaner sounding gain here, so more of a, and so it also tells me that an amp like this probably would work better with a really high output humbucker, you know, like a ceramic or something like that, would sound fantastic on this amp. Okay, enough about that. So we've got it. I mean, I don't need to play any more AC/DC. You get the idea. I play 100 G chords in this video, but it's dialed in. So that's all you got to do in order to get some DC tone out of this orange amp. Start with the gain, get the gain where you want, and then bring the volume online. All right, so let's switch. I'm just going to leave it there. It's going to pop. Let's switch to the Telecaster. Okay. All right. I'll put it on the clean real quick just so you can hear this too. It's a little bit you can it's not quite as loud on on the, oh, I had the neck blended in there. Hang on a sec. That sounds better. That sounds more like a Telecaster. Okay, so got the Telecaster. Same thing as before. It's going to be pretty much on when I switch it to the dirty. Maybe not. It doesn't. Okay, so it's getting, you can tell the difference just putting a little more gain on it, it's getting a little crunchier. So same thing as before with the Telecaster. I'm gonna blend in a little neck pickup. Just want to start with that. More gain. It sounds okay. It doesn't, I'm not, you know, it doesn't sound great. I'm not playing it great. It's livable. I think if you kept playing with it, you could get a little better. So that's a Telecaster. Same thing, if you don't have this ability to blend, you can put a little reverb on there. So a little bit of reverb. So that's the Telecaster, a little bit of reverb. So now we're going to move on to the Strat. All right, so Strat on the clean. It's, as you would expect, thinner yet than the Telecaster. So same kind of thing, put it on the dirty channel. It sounds pretty good. Put a little reverb in there. You know, you could play AC/DC and enjoy yourself with that. There's nothing wrong with that. For the Tele, or for the Strat, you might want to, if it's too bright, you know, you can take some tone off of it with the, and it'll sound a little more pleasing if it gets a little shrill. But that's it, you know, solid state amp, same process as the Marshall. As far as dialing in to your point, it's just you start with the gain and then use the volume. And I suspect different solid state amps work differently. This is the way this amp works. And but I guess what I would say is recognize whatever pattern, try to understand how your amp is working, and then once you build that model in your head, then you can from there you can learn how to quickly dial in the tones that you want. So I guess that's the lesson here is try to build that model in your head of how your amp is actually processing the signal. All right. So now we'll move on to the last amp, which is a monitor. This should be interesting. Okay, I'm back with the Roland Cube monitor now. It's a 32-watt solid-state monitor. It's a compact little thing, built like a tank. This screen on it's like a Mad Max screen. I don't know if that's metal or plastic. It feels like metal, but this thing looks like it's ready to go to a party and get something thrown at it. And I think that's really sort of what it is. It's like a party sort of monitor where you can pump music through it. The way it's not a guitar amp in that it's supposed to have a full, frequency response driver in it. The driver's kind of got a foil looking material inside, and when you pump music through it, it really brings out the kick drum, just the boop, boop, boop. It's very bass heavy. You can hear I'm not getting anything. I'm really not getting much out of my high E string with this amp. And you can see I've got, it's got a 2-band equalizer, and I've got those set neutral. If I try to crank the treble to get a little more out of it, it just scoops the mids more. And if I mess with the bass, anything I do just sort of makes it sound worse in terms of this equalization. So I'm leaving those alone. I'm coming in on channel 2. I'm not sure if channel 1 is a mic preamp or not, so I'm just coming in on channel 2. And so this represents something that's not a guitar amp. It doesn't have the fidelity of a speaker system. It's not as good as like a stereo speaker or the kind of monitor that you would think like a studio monitor that you would have for listening critically to music. It's nothing like that. It's more like a, something that you can take to a wedding or something and just kick out, popular tunes on and have it thump the floor. It's amazing how much bass pumping power this thing has. It's almost like a subwoofer had a baby. A subwoofer and a normal stereo speaker had a baby, and this is what they produced. I mean, anyway, okay. So what do you do if you've got something like this? You can't overdrive it. I've tried to overdrive this. I can't overdrive it. Master volume at max, input volume at max, it won't go into breakup. It'll break up a little bit, but I don't have enough gain with this guitar to drive it, and the other guitars I have equal or less gain in there, or output on their humbuckers. So, or single coils. So what do I do? So you have to go into the signal chain at this point. There's two options. The most popular option is use a pedal, just like this pedal. And this is an overdrive pedal. You put this in the signal chain, it produces the overdrive, and then you get that crunch tone that you want. And overdrive pedals, I'm sure you know what they are. There's a ton of them. There's also amp pedals. Your other option is to do something like this. This is a USB audio interface. You can plug in your guitar input into it, and then that can go into a cell phone or a tablet or a computer, and then you can use a program, GarageBand, for example, on Apple, and they have just software versions of overdrive pedals and software versions of amps, and then you can get a distorted tone that you then send to your monitor as an input. So your two options are overdrive pedal or a software version of an overdrive pedal, or a amp on a pedal box. So we're just going to use this overdrive pedal. I got to get, whoa, I got to get the everything set up. All right, I got the OCD hooked up now. We've got 3 controls on it: volume, drive, tone. Volume and drive pretty much work the same as volume and gain worked on the orange amp, and the tone is pretty close to the tone control on your guitar. It rolls off sort of the high end a little bit, or puts it back on. So let's fire this up. So it's on now. I've just got the controls set 12 o'clock position. This got this switch here, low peak and high peak. Low peak is supposed to be the Tweedy amp. Let's hear what it sounds like. All right, so that's supposed to be kind of a tweed sound, and here's the high peak, which is supposed to be more of a British sound. And you can hear it's got a little more growl, a little more high end. So right off the bat, this has really livened up this monitor. So since this thing operates the same way as the orange amp, we're gonna just approach it the same way that we approach the orange amp. So by operating the same, if I set a drive setting on this, like let's say I set the drive setting to be there. Wherever I set the volume, I get the same amount of kind of crunch. So the procedure, if you remember for the orange, was turn the volume down and then use the gain to get the amount of crunch you want. And since this is a tone and we want all the tone we can get, I'm just going to turn that up for now. So let's got the volume down. I've got the volume on my guitar at around 6 or 7-ish. Maybe I'll give it a little bit. All right. So right now I'm just trying to get the crunch dialed in. So and that sounds pretty good. So we'll bring up the volume. Not quite there yet. I'm going to bring up the volume on my guitar a little bit. I actually wouldn't mind. I'm going to take a little drive off of there. I was going to say I wouldn't mind a little more brightness to it. But you know, part of that is the monitor it doesn't have a lot of high end. All right, so you get the idea. I'm going to just put this back at about neutral and bring my. The nice thing is that when you're not dialing in the guitar or something like this, when you don't have the guitar at 10, you can either adjust the gain or the drive here on the OCD pedal, or you can control it with your guitar. So I have room to add more gain, you know, from my guitar. That's waking it up a little bit. Well, waking it up makes it a little muddy too. That sounds pretty nice. Now, one other benefit of an overdrive pedal in general is you get a lot more sustain. I mean, the sustain on it is significantly longer than this guitar normally has if I just plug it into an amp. So that's a nice benefit. All right, so let's shut this off and switch guitars. Okay, I've switched to the Telecaster. Just the OCD is off. I'm just going clean into the amp. The Telecaster is a little bit brighter, and you can hear it. It's a little brighter on there. So let's turn on the overdrive and see how it sounds. It actually sounds, quite a bit better. All right, let's, it occurred to me as I was playing that I should blend in a little bit of the neck. So, you know, considering where this amp was when it started and you heard it, the Telecaster, with a little bit of the neck pickup in there, it really actually sounds convincingly like a humbucker, and it sounds bright enough for this monitor. I mean, you know, it's got some cut to it. It's not bad. It's actually a more lively sound to me than the Music Man, because this is a brighter guitar, and every bit of brightness you can get out of this amp is helpful. You know, I'm tempted to turn the treble up, but it just gets rid of the mids even more. I guess I could try it. Actually, I guess I could just try it right now. Let me just... So crank that up all the way. You know, now it's too bright and it has no mids, but it sounds more cutting, but you just, it has no mid-range. I've lost all the mid-range. That's pretty good. All right, let's switch to the Strat. All right, turn this off. Now we're getting quite a bit of brightness out of the amp. All right, let's flip it on. I mean, you know, this might be the combination here. Ironically, that when you go to something like this, a bright instrument like this Strat sounds fantastic. Of the three guitars, this one sounds the best on this monitor with an overdrive pedal. Yeah, I mean, I don't need to play anymore. I didn't even need to adjust it. That's just, and I guess I had the tone looks like it was on 9, but whatever. 9 or 10. It's close enough. Yeah, that sounded great. So I think that's probably where I'm going to wrap things. If you've stuck around for this whole video, congratulations. I hope you take away from this some things that you can use to make your own playing more enjoyable at home. This is by no means, you know, like touring or gigging musicians would probably laugh at all of this. But for a home player like myself, this has been an actually useful exercise at making this video. And yeah, I hope you take something away from it. I'll see you next time.